today, St. Mark tells us in verses 2 and 3, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. Most of us are familiar with the Exodus 3 story of Moses and the burning bush. The burning bush was an unusual sight. As Moses stood before this burning bush, he heard the voice of God say, "Moses, take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground." Moses knew that God had spoken to him in that moment. In Exodus 24, it happened to him again. Moses had gone up to the top of Mount Sinai and remained there for 6 days and nights. Suddenly there was a swirling cloud that surrounded the mountain. Moses knew that it was the presence of God, and God gave him the 10 Commandments. Again, Moses knew that God had spoken with him. He knew that God was with him and that God was real. Our gospel story in Mark chapter 9 bears some similarity to the Old Testament accounts of Moses referred to earlier. Peter, James, and John went with Jesus up on Mount Tabor, not far from the village of Nazareth. Then, as with Moses, a cloud came upon them, and in that sacred and mysterious moment of their lives, they heard the voice of God say, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." There they knew it was a rare moment. They believed that God had spoken. The disciples never forgot what happened that day on the mountain, and no doubt this was intended. John wrote in his gospel, "We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only." John 1 verse 14. Peter also wrote of it. "We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain." 2 Peter 1, 16 to 18. Those who witnessed the transfiguration bore witness to it to the other disciples and to countless millions down through the centuries. In the transfiguration, the disciples saw Jesus for who he is, the Son of God. Very often the words transformation and transfiguration are used interchangeably when discussing the story of Jesus. To be transfigured, however, is to be changed in outward form or appearance, while maintaining one's true essence and nature. Jesus' transfiguration does not alter who he is, the divine one in human form, but rather gives to those who see the change a visual new understanding of him because they see him outwardly in a different light. When we speak of transformation, however, we tend to mean a complete or essential change in composition or structure. Jesus on the mountain with Moses and Elijah is not transformed. He's not changed inwardly, but is transfigured before his disciples, shown to be who he truly is. He is not made to have a new self, but an appearance that conveys himself, his true self, as the divine Son of God, standing in the company of Israel's greatest prophets. Older ones among us may recall the childhood comic book superhero, Superman, who is the true or transfigured identity of newspaper reporter Clark Kent. In like manner, the biblical transfiguration, the true identity of Jesus, is revealed. Jesus is the very Son of God. In fact, Jesus is God. This is what Mark seeks to communicate to us through the record of the disciples' experience on the mountain. Transfiguration also means more than just a change in appearance. Transfiguration suggests to us a new way of seeing the world and about being in the world. Transfiguration, according to Robert Hughes in his book Beloved Dust, means becoming who we already are. Hughes asserts that Jesus is not changed at the Transfiguration. What happens reveals to the disciples the truth about who Jesus has been all along. So what about you and me? Note that the transfiguration of Jesus does not occur at some special time of retreat or reclusivity in his life, but rather in the midst of his active ministry between Peter's confession, found in Mark chapter 8, and his final trip to Jerusalem in Mark chapter 10. Similarly, it is often in our everyday places and experiences that we too encounter the living God. In the story following the Transfiguration, in verses 14 through 29, the disciples and Jesus come off the mountain and went right back down into the valley. There they found a boy who was having epileptic seizures. The mother and father were terribly worried about their sick son, who often fell into fire and burned himself. In other words, the disciples came down off that mountain right into the problems of everyday life, of real life. The disciples discovered that God is also down in the valley and does not reside only on the mountaintop. You and I also experience the valleys of real life. After all, Mondays always follow Sundays, and God is there with us. Most of us know what it's like at the bottom of the mountain. The valley represents the ordinariness of life. It is where most of us spend most of our times and lives. It is in the valley that we grow, and our faith is stretched and strengthened. In the valley of real life, you know that God is with you there, and you know that God speaks to you there, giving words of hope and strength for those times. As we live out our lives day by day, seeking to follow the teachings and ways of Jesus, people ought to see us for who we really are, our true identity as children of God and the disciples of Jesus. In the valleys, we are therefore called to live out in our daily lives our discipleship, even in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic realities that we face daily. This is where God meets us and journeys with us. This is where our own transfiguration unfolds as our faith is tested and often renewed. It is where we are called to press on as God's people, being his witnesses to the world, being lights in our world as God's transfigured people. Amen.